stands for Bridge the Divide, and today we're going to be doing a roundtable discussion where a few young people, we're all from Virginia, United States, and so we're going to talk today in a kind of informal yet informed discussion about President Trump's first 100 plus days. And so how this is going to work, it's an informal discussion, but we're all politically active students. And we have some things to say about the first 100 days, and this is really going to be a model for how Bridge the Divide encourages people, and especially our ambassadors, to have discussions and to host discussions in their communities. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. So like I said, I'm Lizzie, and then we'll start with Callie over here.
Hi, I'm Hallie. I'm a graduating senior, really excited to go off to college, and I'm most passionate about international relations.
Hello, my name is Tyler. I'm also a senior, and I'm also going off to college. And the thing I'm most passionate about is American politics.
My name is Chris, senior, going off to college. I can't wait to talk about the Trump administration. My dear friend.
Let's do it.
So we're all pretty excited to get started, and I just want to say thank you to our three debaters here today, and we're excited for how this is going to turn out. We filmed a previous video about what political polarization means and how that's played out in the past few months in the United States specifically. So how do you guys think certain political polarization has been affected by the campaign that was run, either President Trump's or, the other presidential bids that there were? How do you guys think those are maybe related, if at all?
I think that we're seeing a lot of stagnation within all branches of government within the first 100 days across both sides of the aisle, and I think that that's because of a lot of what happened in 2016, but also kind of the building political polarization and the lack of willingness to compromise and really try to see the other side that we talked about previously.
And with that rising polarization, that just gets people turned off by politics. There's only the loudest voices in the room are the two polar ends of the party, the radical ends, and there's that moderate end that just get stuck in the middle, and they just don't like what they're hearing, and they just don't like to talk about their views openly. A lot of people don't like to share what political party they're affiliated with, and that definitely stagnates the discourse.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to consider whether the 2016 election was a symptom of this nation's polarization or a cause of it. I think certainly when you get characters ranging from Sanders to Trump, that there's gonna be a lot of discourse that divides people. But I'm not sure. I don't know the answers.
Yeah, I'm sure this is something that we're going to be thinking about for the years to come, and definitely political scientists are probably having a lot of work to do over figuring this out. But I think it's really interesting to consider whether this was something that was bound to happen regardless, based on how American politics has been going in the past few years or maybe even a few decades, or whether it was solely a product of kind of the debate or the campaigns that were run. So yeah, it definitely affects us though going into the future. So just just to mention for those who are watching, we're from different parts of the political spectrum. So this is going to be an interesting discussion to see the kind of diversity of thought that we bring to the table. But just to start, so what are your initial reactions to the first 100 days or the Trump administration's performance so far?
Well, I think Trump has pulled 180 on many of the issues he campaigned on, but I think that's a good thing. I think Trump is sort of a businessman. He's flexible. He said nothing's off the table in terms of negotiation, and that can also look bad from a politics perspective. People can say he's inconsistent, like his views aren't coherent, but I don't know, maybe that's the savvy businessman side of him. I think his administration, I think a lot of people are frustrated with his administration. I think there are good reasons to be frustrated with his administration. But, all in all, I would say it's hard to sum up exactly, but those are my feelings.
I think too, a lot of people, when you look at the first 100 days of a presidency, which is kind of an arbitrary milestone, which I think was started under the Reagan administration. Was FDR.
Yeah.
Thank you. Got Chris the fact checker going for us.
He's our fact checker.
Yeah, I'm always right, so we don't need any fact checking.
Yeah.
But we have computers in
Yeah.
case, so.
So, but I think that we look at what was promised during the campaign and then what has actually panned out. And a lot of people have been underwhelmed by Trump and what actually he's been able to do. But I think that it's important to know that the very premise of a campaign is to make promises. And I think that certainly it's the case with every single presidential candidate that you want to go out there and you want to rally support, so you make promises and you say things and you do your best to deliver, but obviously there are geopolitical realities that prevent you from doing that, possibly when you get into office. But I think that it's interesting to look at percentages and polls and see that it's looking like Trump has maybe come under the average as far as like promises per campaign season versus what he's actually been able to accomplish. But I think that that is in part due to division among other branches and putting legislation through.
My opinion on the first 100 days, like Chris was saying, he did do a 180 on a couple of his promises. And, during a campaign, you definitely promise a lot of things that, you can't keep. It's a campaign. It's not a good thing, but that's just how it happens. And I think, the reason he did a 180 on many of the issues he promised on, that's just like a byproduct of being in the office of the president. You understand the limits of the office, and you have people in the intelligence to make more informed decisions. So you can definitely shift your viewpoint when you get all that information. I do think he has shown at least effort to keep all the promises that he's made. He's trying to put the wall in the budget. He tried to ban immigration from several Muslim countries. He just did. He got Gorsuch and the Supreme Court nomination, which is a huge win. He tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. So he's definitely tried. And I think a lot of his supporters see that, and they like that. There's a recent poll. It's like 96% of Trump supporters, stand by their vote for Trump in the November election. And I think that's because they like what they're seeing. They like at least the effort he's putting forth to keep his promises.
So, but if you're thinking about those two things, Tyler mentioned that 96% of Trump voters are happy with their vote and they're pleased with what President Trump has done. And you consider that with Chris's point that Trump's approval rating is at 41%, that means that, the majority of people are not happy with what he's doing. And maybe he hasn't done enough to reach out to those people who didn't vote for him, which is, the majority of Americans who did vote, seeing as Hillary Clinton won the majority of the popular vote.
And on the topic of promises, the focus of his entire inauguration speech was, "I want to be the president for all of you," which I think we talked about in our previous video about bridging the divide and reaching all aspects and all possible constituents. And I think that that was a good sign, but I think that also he's pushing through with a lot of the promises he made for a very specific party base.
Yeah.
I think directly after he became president, he went on a campaign, like a drive across the country to all
like a
the
victory tour.
to all the states in which he won. So he had that inaugural address where he's like, "I want to be the president for all Americans." And then directly after that, he went on a victory tour to all the to only the states that he won. So it was.
And those victory tours are typical for presidents to do, but that's interesting to know the places that he did visit on that tour. So you can think about promises and kind of what he fulfilled, but are we getting what we expected?
No. How many times? I think there's a 2-minute YouTube video on where Trump is saying China. It's hundreds of times he's saying China. He said we're going to label them as a currency manipulator. We're going to fix this trade deficit, and trade deficits are actually indicative of a strong economy, not a weak one. He's saying all this stuff about China. They're terrible. Their steel's terrible. Blah 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 blah, flooding the market. Then he didn't do anything about China. His answer to that was working with China on North Korea is more important than winning in these trade dealings. And I feel like part of his campaign platform, speaking up for the silent majority, these people who have been left behind after the globalization that's been occurring since NAFTA and since all these free trade deals have been passed. And I feel like he has absolutely broken that promise to the people of the steel belt, the Rust Belt.
And I think going off of that too, we see China moving more towards a soft power initiative, whereas the U.S. is focusing a lot on hard power initiative, especially with the $54 billion increase in military spending. And I think that there's an interesting vacuum that's going to be created if the U.S. continues with sort of more protectionist measures and wants to pull out of trade and more diplomatic relationships, especially internationally. And I think that that's something that is worrisome and we need to be aware of, because like Chris said, in an increasingly globalized world, soft power is incredibly important. We can use it as a great leveraging point.
I think for, policy-wise and the things he promised, I think we are getting what we expected. He got rid of TPP, he got Gorsuch, in the Supreme Court. He kept a lot of his promises. I'm not saying he didn't do a 180 on a couple of things like China.
What about NAFTA? His trade platform was China is bad, NAFTA is bad. We need to renegotiate NAFTA. Mexico is.
I'm not saying he kept all his promises. All right, I'm saying he kept a large majority of them. He did.
And it's only been 100 days too. I think we have to keep in mind the fact that it's an arbitrary measure.
But I do have to say though that at the heart of his campaign was this idea of America first, right?
Yes.
But we're seeing certain actions that are being taken in Syria.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know that's entirely isolationist or America first type policies. And he obviously has been working on certain domestic policies as far as his executive orders go, like you said, getting Gorsuch in the Supreme Court. But I don't know that he really is following a certain ideology or kind of, guiding principles within his presidency that are directing what he's doing, what he's saying. And I think in his campaign he really did have a clear message, and now I don't think we're seeing that so much.
Another aspect of the America First thing was Trump was saying how we were losing out on not only trade deals but also like NATO, the free protection that Japan gets, et cetera, et cetera. And so America First, we're gonna use our military for our purposes. We're not really seeing that, I feel like, and I think the strikes on Syria are just confirming that Trump will have a foreign policy similar to Obama's and Clinton's, that's sort of interventionist as opposed to isolation.
Excuse me. I think also. Sorry, not to interrupt.
I mean, please. Go on.
Weird throat sounds. I was reading an article this morning, and it was talking about how Trump is kind of letting Secretary Mattis take the lead on a lot of his more military foreign policy interventions.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about that. I was so excited when I saw that he made the choice of Secretary Mattis for his defense secretary. And I think that you brought up the Syria strikes, and the intention of that was to serve as more of a warning. And I think that our main goal in Syria is to combat ISIS and finish what we started with the Raqqa offense, and less so supporting Assad or fighting against Assad and kind of trying to enforce a stabilization regime like we did in Iraq following the Iraq War. Because I think that we've learned a lot of lessons from that, and I think that we want our tact to be different in Syria, but just returning to the idea of domestic politics, I think that Mattis has been taking the lead on a lot of the defense initiatives, and I think that that's why we're seeing a shift from what Trump said versus what actually is beginning to happen.
I think, there's more to focus on when talking about did we get what we expected than strictly policy. I think a lot of people expected when he got in office that he would, have a more presidential tone.
Yeah, like did the gravity of the office affect how he has conducted himself?
And
Which is the question.
I've watched a lot of his interactions with other people, and I think I see, he's trying to tone it down a bit, but then oftentimes, that New York brash businessman comes out.
I mean, we see that in his Twitter too. I think that that's been a really dangerous
Absolutely.
part, and I think that part of me wants to like it because it's increasing transparency and it's kind of like
Yeah,
we're
it seems
using
like a
social
great thing,
right, but then
a
I think
direct connection between the
Right.
leader of the free world and
Mhm.
the people who
right,
he represents.
but I think it's being used irresponsibly in a lot of ways, and I am not necessarily in support of having a really tailored public image, but I think that there needs to be more intervention in some of the things that are being put out there.
Well, I do know that a lot of his supporters, people who used their one vote on him, wanted him to act more presidential. That was
Mhm.
the kind of thing going
Right.
into the election. Is he going to act more presidential when he finally takes hold of the office? And a lot of his supporters are disappointed, from what I've heard, that he's still using his Twitter in the same way that he used it during his campaign. So, I don't know how he think that looks to his constituents. And it's almost like a comedic type thing.
Right.
I feel it, and it's troubling because there is a certain gravity to the office of the president that should
I feel like
deter that kind of reckless Twitter usage.
I feel like a lot of the appeal of Trump though was that he was crude. He wasn't afraid to say things, and so I wonder what his constituents want. I'm sure some people appreciate the Twitter, even though it is kind of reckless, frankly.
I think that people look at it and they feel like that's indicative of draining the swamp, and I think that that's dangerous because Trump represents a very large piece of corporate America, and he has a lot of ties to corporate America. And I think that when you associate draining the swamp, quote unquote, with anti-intellectualism, we're in a very dangerous place because we want people who are informed and people who have the best intentions for the government in mind, running the government and being at the forefront of it. So I think that a lot of the appeal with the Twitter is that we see someone who's crude, who's brash, who's not afraid to say what he thinks.
Who's one of the people.
Right.
Like everyone else uses Twitter, why can't he?
Right, exactly. But I don't think that that is necessarily, we're associating that with how it should be associated, if that makes sense.
And I think that his Twitter usage has become a point of contention within his own administration.
Mm-hmm,
Because
definitely.
things that he's saying on his Twitter are being disagreed with by his officials.
Right.
And so the policymakers who are kind of carrying out his wishes and what his administration has said that they're going to do, it conflicts with what he's writing on Twitter.
Yeah.
So that's confusing for us as
Right.
his constituents to not have a clear message of what's going on. But what do you guys think that his cabinet kind of represents as far as carrying out his message and just general comments about his cabinet? Because I know that some of the choices, and as people watching probably know, a lot of them were contentious.
Yeah.
And, did require a lot of forceful action in the Senate to push them through. So
I think he has a lot of some of his, General Mattis. Everyone loves him. He's the man.
It's a fantastic choice, in my opinion.
Although his nickname's Mad Dog, he's not Mad Dog. Right? He's very sensible. I think he has some very good minds. On the economic side, Secretary of Treasury and
What's it?
yeah. I feel like he has some good minds there. But I do think some of his cabinet picks, for example, DeVos, I don't think she has really any
yeah, Secretary of
experience.
Education.
Yeah, Secretary of Education. I don't think she has really any experience in that.
It seems that there's a trend that a few of his cabinet picks came from the same background as he
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
More affluent,
Right.
kind of affecting change through in a monetary
Mhm.
kind of way, which is kind of what we're seeing in Betsy DeVos. So
And I think originally there's a lot of concern with Tillerson, especially his connections with Russia.
yeah, and his work with ExxonMobil.
Yeah, and a lot of things, maybe exploiting his
Yeah.
position, like about his company. I like him.
But connections may breed certain corruption. If our governmental officials feel certain ties to people who are not in our government, I guess we could see that too. So maybe those were some of the concerns of
Absolutely, and I think if there's any, doubt that there are connections there, I think those connections should be looked into. I'm definitely not comfortable having a Secretary of State that has, potential to have that. But if there's connections, we should look into them.
And we're seeing tensions, a lot of tensions right now with the investigation as far as Russia's involvement or potential involvement
the elephant
corruption
in the
in
room
that.
right
Yes,
now.
exactly. And I know I was reading an article last night. They're assembling legal teams and they're getting ready to take it to court. And I think this could be a very contentious issue.
Yeah, so what do you guys think about that? Personally, I think it's really troubling, and I think it's a particularly contentious issue for the Republican Party. A lot of these freshman congressmen and women feel ties to Trump. They feel like they maybe owe Trump something because he brought in this really large Republican base, these new Republicans, and they kind of owe him for their election. And so I think a lot of Republicans are maybe scared to come out and criticize certain things, particularly on the Russia issue, but I think this may be a turning point for the Republicans where they start to come around and kind of question some of the things that he's doing.
Yeah, so I think we're definitely going to see a lot of contention in the next coming weeks as the Russia investigation begins to take off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say it's pretty kind of troublesome, worrying to have this going on with Russia out of everyone. And we knew during the campaign that there were maybe some issues with Trump's campaign in Russia. Now this is coming to light when he's in the office. And I definitely think it's worth investigating, but it doesn't shed a good light for me on the Trump administration.
No.
You were talking earlier about how some Republicans think they owe Trump something, so they're not going to speak out on this whole ordeal. I think on that note, you got to put America before your party. All right, this is it's a bad issue. All right, any sense of Russia trying to undermine American democracy or any sense of possible collusion between Trump's campaign and the Russians, that's just mind-boggling. That is absolutely horrible. That's huge.
Yeah.
So,
and I think both Democrats and Republicans now
yeah,
feel like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And anywhere in between.
Absolutely, and I think there should be investigations, and people should put aside party, America, put America.
Yeah.
Yeah, do I think Trump is colluding with the Russian government? No, but I think, especially with Michael Flynn, not disclosing that the Turkish government paid him money to act as being a secret lobbyist for the Turkish government, changing military planes to conform to Turkish needs. I think that looks absolutely terrible. I don't think Trump is going to get impeached, though. I think I think Michael Flynn was appointing him was a bad reflection on Trump's judgment, and it's also strange how Trump defended Flynn instead of just
Letting him go. Yeah.
And he knew about it before he hired him, and he was warned. And then,
Right.
however a few weeks or so into Michael Flynn's kind of job in the White House, he was let go. And now you see Comey, which is, to me, it all sounds very fishy. That all
Right.
this is going on while he's trying to investigate Russia. And
Yeah.
just things that Trump has criticized him before with the Hillary Clinton email scandal. So we'll be seeing more of this and
Unfolding.
Yes.
Yeah.
The optics are horrible on the Comey thing. He said he thought it would be like a win-win for both sides. And, I kind of see what he could, thinks about that like earlier on the presidency when Democrats were really mad about what he did to Hillary Clinton and stuff like that. But the optics on that are horrible. And I think Comey's testifying very soon, and it should be interesting to see what happens there. As far as relations with Russia, it's very interesting. During the campaign, people thought he was really buddy-buddy with Putin, and he hated the Chinese, but in his presidency, it seems like that relationship is almost flipped. In his meeting with the Chinese president at Mar-a-Lago, they seemed, very friendly and they're working out deals. But Putin is like putting out like reconnaissance ships off the coast of like New Hampshire and like buzzing U.S. Navy ships. And they're being more provocative.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It seems that they're not as friendly as people have set them out to be.
I guess we'll see, but this kind of begs the larger question: what kind of message is Trump and his administration sending to the rest of the world, particularly as it pertains to things like his immigration bans? What does that mean for his presidency?
I think the optics on that are also extremely horrible. People throughout his campaign have, said he hated, Muslims and just hates the whole culture. And then he goes out and then he bans immigrants coming from 7 Muslim countries.
Yeah, Muslim.
Yeah,
There's also the preference for religious minorities.
Yeah.
Right.
So optics are horrible. My opinion, I don't necessarily know if he really hates Muslims. He just went to Saudi Arabia and he was having a great time there. And I don't think he intended to target those countries because they were Muslim majority. I think he had different intentions. If he was just targeting Muslim majority countries, he hit the top 3 heavily populated Muslim countries. So.
Yeah, but he was very open during his campaign about saying, and he criticized President Obama for not saying radical Islamic terrorism. So I think it is fitting with kind of the rhetoric that was going on in his campaign. If it does have, radical Islamic terrorism and kind of those ties to that. But there's been a lot of contention over this as well, like much of what's happened in his first 100 days.
I feel like the ban from those 7 countries felt really random. I don't really understand what Trump had to gain for it, and then maybe fulfilling a campaign promise to stop Muslim immigration. But also, I think this reflects poorly on his administration as well. Kellyanne Conway and Michael Flynn, Sean Spicer, the press secretary, they were citing made-up terrorist attacks. They were citing terrorist attacks incorrectly, and it just makes them seem like they're afraid or targeting Muslim communities. And it's bad.
Yeah,
I think the travel ban from the beginning was ill-advised from possibly its intention. I know we're not 100% certain what was intended by it, but I think there are clear undertones. And also just in its sheer implementation, people were just being stopped at airports. Yeah, there was no communication, no planning.
His administration and
Right, it was just an executive order and done, and no one really knew what was going on or how it was supposed to be handled. So I think that just as far as from a logistical perspective, it sheds a really bad light on his ability to carry out orders in an effective manner.
And that really shows how his mindset hasn't really changed from going to a CEO of a large company where you can just make those decisions.
Right.
Going to the office of the president where you have to go through all those proper channels.
A lot of bureaucracy.
You kind of show
to be adjusted to.
Maybe a lack of showing respect for the people who do have to carry it out and kind of the gauging how other people will react to it also. But I think for me what was a bit troubling is his reaction to the federal judges who declared the 2 bans, both of them, unconstitutional, and how he reacted to them, saying that they're not fit to be federal judges, and really criticizing them for carrying out the job that is endowed to them by the Constitution.
Right.
That's troubling for me, kind of undermining the other branches of government that he's supposed to be working alongside.
That's like classic Trump. What else do you expect? He doesn't really, he does that to secretaries of state and other presidential candidates and senators and governors and stuff like that. I don't think he really hears the title. He just goes for it.
Yeah, a lot of it is just unprecedented.
Yeah.
So.
People criticized Obama heavily for his executive power grab with his executive orders on accepting immigrants and his executive orders on environmental regulations. But I feel like Trump is signing these executive orders at unprecedented rates. I I don't feel like that's setting a good precedent for future leaders of this nation. I don't want an overpowered executive branch. I think separation of three branches of government is a good thing.
And I think that there's a dangerous undermining of the legislature that's occurring. And I mean, obviously, we know Congress since its inception has been one of very slow moving, and it's hard to get legislation through both houses. But I think that that is the purpose of it, and I think that it's beyond the reach of the executive to be able to make all of these orders and be able to bypass the legislature, and that's very dangerous in a lot of ways because that's not how our government was set up, and that's not the ideal balance of one strike. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And another big move during his first 100 days is their Congresses, but the Republican majority in Congress, they're rolling out of their healthcare bill.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think? That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's happened.
I think that the intention of that was to take the big federal reach that was established under the ACA and return it to the states. But my concern with that is if you're looking at healthcare and it's run by businesses and industry that's national and international, how can you leverage that divide when, if you want to bring it down to a state level and have each state decide what kind of coverage they want to provide, how do you leverage that with corporations that run on the national and international scale? I think that there could be some tension there.
I think, frankly, this was just a huge embarrassment for not only the Trump administration, but the Republican Party. For 8 years, they've been saying, get rid of Obamacare, we got something better. And when their time came, 8 years in the making, they failed drastically on so many levels.
I'd have to say this was a partial form of self-slaughter for the party. Like you're saying, this is a big moment for the Republican Party to have the executive, the legislative, and now you have a more conservative majority on the Supreme Court. This is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And this was their big chance to kind of please their Republican base and the people who did not particularly agree with Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. And it was, I think it was run through hastily and partially on Paul Ryan's kind of leadership. But also I think there was a lot of pressure from the Trump administration to roll this out.
Obamacare, you can argue about the success of that. A study done by the Kaiser Family Foundation found that in 2010, 30% of Americans who were insured said they or a family member had trouble paying for medical bills. 2017, in last February, they found that number was 29%. So has healthcare gotten more affordable? Not really. But then Trump's policy, that's just kind of confusing. Many people called it Obamacare Light. People called it Obamacare 2.0. And Trump promised that it would insure all Americans. Universal health care. It's crazy. But then it turned out it would deny health care. It would make it so that it would be unaffordable for a lot of people. Premiums went up. It was just worse in every respect. And I agree with everybody. It was bad.
We all agree.
Yeah, so I was just saying before that this is a form of self-slaughter for the Republican Party. They've been waiting for 8 years to, really affect some change in Congress. And it's, they kind of lost their chance, and especially pressure from the Trump administration. And there's this image that's circulating that's kind of famous now, and it's Trump and the Republicans from the House of Representatives kind of celebrating their passage of this health care bill, and it's all white males. So it just brought up an interesting point and something to think about moving forward with the Republican kind of Trump and their interaction with this bill. But I think it'll be festive, if that's the right word to use, to kind of end on the idea of what you guys think about whether Trump is making America great again. And what did that promise? What did that campaign slogan promise?
I feel like Trump was referring to a disappearance of the middle class, especially, as I referred to earlier, because of Chinese competition from around the world, especially China. And I feel like the people he said you're forgotten, but politicians don't answer to you anymore. They don't reflect what you want. I feel like he's kind of lost like who he set out to serve. I guess I don't like if I were a Trump voter who lost my job because my plant relocated to China or Mexico, wherever, I would be irate right now. He saved like a couple hundred jobs by giving major tax breaks to some car companies, but that just doesn't cut it. I do not think that Trump is making America great again. I think he's a continuation of what we've seen before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because he made a lot of radical promises, but he's not cutting it.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about making America great again, we have to remember that there's always been an emphasis on progress and moving towards the future. So when you say make America great again, obviously it's never been horrendous in the past. It's incredibly lucky to be able to live here and enjoy a lot of the privileges that we do just by birthright. But I think it's interesting to think about what precedent he was harkening back to.
I think, when people think of make America great again, I think everyone has a different concept of what that implies, what that means. And I think according to Trump's view of making America great again, I think he's doing a good job. That's what he wants to do. He's, trying to get manufacturing jobs back into America, get many of those people back to work. I think he criticized Obama for being a little too weak on foreign policy, so he goes and drops a Moab or bombs Syrian air bases. So I think he's trying to have a more stronger presence, and that's a big thing that he's really pushing. What he thinks makes America great, a strong foreign stage presence.
Yeah. I think that Make America Great Again doesn't really hold very much behind it. I mean, if you just look at the amalgam of people that he's, brought together, they're not too similar. I'd have to say I think, he's even brought Democrats over to his wing. But I do know, so I think there isn't very much ideological guidance that he's following, and I think that's dangerous for a president. He has this Make America Great Again slogan, but I don't really know how much it holds behind it, especially for these very different people who he's attracting. But what I do know is that whatever he's doing to the Republican Party is only harmful. I'm hoping that for the future, the Republican Party can kind of turn back to its ideological roots and start from the ground up. And if Trump wants to join them, then that's great.
And I think as far as making it great, there needs to be an impetus on turning towards younger constituents and really getting in touch with the times as they are and sentiments as they are, rather than wanting to harken back to some era where that isn't the reality of today. And I think that when you lose touch with that base of constituents that's coming into voting, into elections and stuff like that, you aren't really in touch with the important portions of your party base.
I think Trump has potential here. He's been deregulating a lot of things and helping business grow. And also with the Syrian airstrikes, that kind of reminded me of Reagan's compassionate conservatism, where he intervened because he saw those horrible images of children dying. And so I think he definitely has potential to do great things, but maybe these first 100 days were not a good start.
Yeah, and I think what does leave me a little bit more hopeful than he himself is certain people that he surrounded himself with, who I do trust them to carry out and advise him on policies that I know will promote a greater good and also a good for the constituents and especially the Republican Party. And I think it's really important for us to sit down with this and talk about what will dictate our future in the United States and the influence of the United States around the world, and especially Trump himself. So I thank you for sitting down today for a discussion. It was a lot of fun, and I know that all of our ambassadors at Bridge the Divide and all of those who follow us will really enjoy this and get something from it. So thank you.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you.
So happy to be part of it.
See you guys later.